gentlemen, on behalf of the Prisutdelingen Foundation, it is a pleasure for me to welcome you to this award ceremony. My name is Sylo Tarako, and I'm a member of the Board of Trustees. We are gathered here in a building of great historical importance from the perspective of human rights, freedom of expression, and civil courage. All priceless qualities these days, especially when it comes to journalism. Each year, the Prisutdelingen Foundation and the Stiftung award press prizes to courageous, truth-seeking journalists and media outlets in Eastern Europe. Due to the inhumane war of aggression that the Russian state is waging on Ukraine, we find ourselves in an extraordinary situation this year. The 2022 prize laureates have had to risk their lives to be able to do their work. This year, all 5 of the free media awards are being bestowed on Ukrainian photographers, videographers, journalists, war correspondents, and media outlets. Photographers Mstislav Chernov and Evgeny Maloletka, journalist and author Natalia Gumenyuk, the online newspaper Zaborana, photo and video correspondent Andrei Dubchak, and journalist Vladislav Yesipenko, who is currently being held as a political prisoner. These honors are being awarded in recognition of the prize laureates' diligent effort to document the suffering of the Ukrainian people and war crimes committed by the Russian army. Before I came here, I saw in the news that Kiev is again bombed and that many cities are without electricity. The journalism produced in Ukraine under these extreme circumstances is of exceptionally high quality, not to mention the importance of it. We also want to acknowledge the fixers in Ukraine, that is, those who help foreign correspondents do their jobs. Dear friends, honored laureates, we deeply appreciate the fact that you have made the journey from your war-torn country to come to Oslo to share your stories with us. Some of you had to travel by car and train for several days to get out of Ukraine, and then to board flights to Oslo from Warsaw, Krakow, Budapest, and Prague. We are looking forward to spending some meaningful and memorable days with you. A musical interlude today will be provided by Tora Augestad, Trygve Seim, Svante Henriksson, and Frode Hatley. This will be the premiere performance of the piece Make Love, which was written especially for this occasion, featuring music by Trygve Seim and lyrics by Ukrainian poet Yuri Izdruk. Jonas Bendiksen, who has spent quite some time working as a photographer in Eastern Europe, will deliver the main address to this year's prize laureates. The award ceremony itself will be performed by the jury. Before I give the floor to our partner Manuel Hartung of the Stiftung, I would like to add my sincere hope that the voices of all the laureates being honored here today will ring out and be heard around the world. We need the images and documentation from Ukraine, and we need your voice. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sylo, for the introductory remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a meaningful and important day for media in Europe, for journalists, and also for me personally. My name is Manuel Hartung. I have been working as a journalist for years, having been serving as head of the science and education sections at the German weekly Die Zeit, and since the beginning of this year, I'm serving as Zeit Foundation's chairman of the executive board. Now I'm standing here in deep admiration and in deep respect for this year's Free Media Award winners. With your continuous reporting, you are making an invaluable contribution to press freedom. You are tirelessly reporting on the suffering of the Ukrainian people. You are documenting Russia's war of aggression. Through your work, numerous war crimes have been exposed. Your work means a lot for peace, for the freedom of the press, and for all the journalists around the world who are experiencing both challenging conditions, as many of them do, but also a more peaceful environment, as many others do. Press freedom was an important leitmotif of publisher Gerd Bucerius. He founded Die Zeit in 1946 after World War II, trying to help build a better and a democratic Germany. In 1971, Bucerius established Zeit Foundation, an independent entity. Zeit Foundation has been supporting the free press in Eastern Europe and the world for decades through fellowships for journalists as well as through awards. And I'm very grateful that we have such an excellent cooperation with our friends at Frit Uhr Foundation who are hosting us today and tomorrow in Oslo. And thank you all. The Frit Uhr Foundation is such a committed partner and a great leader fostering and furthering press freedom worldwide. And this purpose is more important than ever. The freedom of the press is at stake in Europe as well as around the world. We are facing this reality for several years now, in a period of harsh realisms after a period of optimism several years ago. I did some archival research, as journalists sometimes do, and I looked deeper into the speeches at the awards ceremony back in 2012, 10 years ago. And we all of the people participated, were much more optimistic back then. In 2012, the first mayor of the free and Hanseatic city of Hamburg welcomed the awardees to the Hamburg Town Hall, and he confidently spoke of, quote, an awards ceremony which continues to support a hopeful development and which serves to present and promote journalists who are part of this development and are moving it forward, unquote. 10 years ago, many of us were convinced that backlashes will only be temporary. And I personally was adhering to a narrative of continuous progression too. Today, after this turning point in history on February 24th, we know it takes many efforts for us standing together in order to fight for the free press and the fellow journalists around the world. Given this, Zeit Foundation will expand its efforts and its fight for press freedom in the future. And the Free Media Awards in 2023 will be at the heart of a whole week of press freedom taking place in Hamburg. Today, I'm very grateful that we have the chance to convene in the Nobel Institute, thanks to our friends at Frit Uhr. And it's a special place. I'm hopeful that the genius loci will help us send 4 messages from this award ceremony. First, a message of clarity. We stand together against aggressive means restricting the freedom of the press as well as freedom in general. And second, a message of solidarity. We are supporting journalists in Ukraine in their important work to cover the war and to continue their reporting under extreme conditions. And third, a message of confidence. We together can turn the tide and work for a society that is open, free, and liberal. And fourth, a message of peace. We should not cede the belief in a better world and a peaceful world in the decades to come. Thank you very much.
I'm Jonas Bendiksen. I stand before you as a reader of news, as a journalistic and photographic colleague, honored and utterly humbled. You are invited here because you all, in each your own way, are giving us some of the best journalism that's being produced today in extraordinarily difficult circumstances. And we are here together to pay tribute to you all. Military tacticians have always talked about the fog of war, the confusion and lack of situational awareness that one experiences in the battlefield. But this applies also to the understanding of what is happening from the outside. Because while information can travel faster and spread further than ever before, the fog of war has thickened and became a raging blizzard of questionable information, guesses, lies, propaganda. Disinformation is so easily circulated with the aim to confuse, pacifize, sow conflict. Technology on its own does not help clear the air. For this, we need uncompromising, factual, on-the-ground journalism, transparent reporting, and informed, wise analysis and context. This is hard to do in normal circumstances. But in Ukraine now, this work is very challenging. The scale of the atrocities and war crimes are astounding. Access to key events and places is restricted. There are blind zones everywhere. The risks one must take to be in the field is oftentimes severe. When I was asked to give this speech, I questioned why I was an appropriate voice. Sure, my grandfather came from Kamenets Podolsky in Western Ukraine, but I assume that's not really the reason why I'm here. And sure, I have traveled and worked a lot in various parts of Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union, but I have never done anything remotely heroic. Nothing resembling the work you, today's prize winners, are doing. On the contrary, in recent years, I've been doing the polar opposite with my experimentations and investigations of the phenomenon of fake news and synthetic computer-generated information, even running my own amateur fake news troll factory for a while. And this makes it almost uncomfortable to stand here in front of people like you. But maybe that is the point. I know, probably better than most, how easy it is to produce stuff that looks like and feels like real journalism. I've got first-hand experience with how you can sit here in Oslo and use your computer to create articles and news photos that people mistake for the real thing. It's actually getting ridiculously easy to do this at this point. And from there, it's simple math. The easier it is to lie and confuse, the more important the work you do is. So above all, I think of myself here as a representative of audiences everywhere, of all those who are far away, but are completely dependent on you, for showing us the ground realities. The war in your Ukraine concerns and affects us all, and I'm just one of all the people who follow the events, not daily, but almost hourly. There are differences between all the foreign media crews who go to Ukraine and your own situation. You are there doing this work every day, even in the quieter moments, when the front pages of the world are filled with other things. Beyond the obvious risks you take in the field, there are the dangers for the civilian population in general, just living one's life. And I'm certain that every single one of you have colleagues and friends who have sacrificed their own well-being, even their own bodies, doing this task, doing the work that you do. And you also work while worrying for loved ones who are in the middle of bombardments, and those who are at the front lines fighting. And Vladislav, needless to say, is not even here, because he's in prison for this very work. There are multiple wars going on at the same time, the one fought with artillery barrages, tanks, and in the trenches. But there's also the all-out information war. Here, real information and fact itself is the target. Information itself, and not least disinformation, is weaponized. We read that Putin is possibly running short on the supply of competent troops and precision bombs, but tyrants never seem to run short on lies and the people who are willing to tell them. This is when the reporting and witnessing that you are doing is completely key. Not just in the documentation of the worst crimes, but also in the smaller stories of how people are coping and trying to claw out some sort of normalcy in such extreme situations. The digital media space also comes with new challenges that defy the rational. When first-hand reporting from the massacres of Bucha are being contested as theater, staged by the victims themselves. This necessitates that the level of professionalism in the documentation is impeccable. In a world where everything people disagree with can be labeled fake news, the context around any information, whether text, video, or photographs, is getting more and more important, possibly more important than the information itself. The level of transparency of how, where, when, by whom, and why something was recorded is critical to separate the real journalism from the imposters. The well-documented stories that you tell are also a key ingredient in that the rest of the world, well, minus a few places, see how that the atrocities going on is a collective concern to rally and keep supporting Ukraine with the means to fight. I want to note that the award is also honoring the people who are often called fixers. This term is somehow problematic. These people are part of the teams producing all of the quality journalism we consume. A foreign crew will typically come in with people called field producers, culture background specialists, translators, safety experts. But somehow the local equivalents are just fixers, while in truth they perform all of these critical tasks. From my own experience, when the international media land somewhere, in whatever crisis, the best journalists and photographers are in some sense often simply the ones with the best fixers. They're simply keys to get the story spread far and wide. While many journalists and photographers are reporting from Ukraine and produce copious stories, much of it good, in different ways the work by you, the prize winners, are just stunning examples of physical and mental bravery. Some of you made the choice to stay behind when everyone else was gone, or opposite, have been the ones to proceed as far into the front lines, where no one by any measure should go. Several of you use new digital technologies to tell stories in innovative ways. As a photographer myself, I have for many years observed that photographic icons are hardly produced anymore. Those images that transcend the continuous flow of images and are lasting markers of our time. We all know the key images from the fall of the Berlin Wall, Tiananmen Square, the Vietnam War, the Second World War, etc. But with the continuous stream of images we are all subjected to daily in our oversaturated visual culture, even I, as a lover of documentary photography, have concluded that these icons are almost something of the past. But some of the images from the invasion of Ukraine, made by people here among us, has made me change my mind. Several of the images will surely remain etched into the visual cortex of history and define this era. There's the old adage that journalism is the first draft of history. But practiced on the highest level, it goes beyond this. Once the war is over, and the rain of bullets ceases and the roar of tanks quietens, then the stockpiled arsenal of all your witnessing will be used again and again for memory, for grieving, for the education of future generations, for the historians, and hopefully for justice and the courts. Because as opposed to the missiles and bombs, which end their mission as soon as they detonate, the words, photographs, and video that you have given the world will keep enlightening us for generations. Thank you.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, my name is Martin Paulsen. I am a member of the jury of the Free Media Awards. Together with me here and on the stage today, I have the rest of the jury: Alice Båta, Silvia Støber, Jori Dorkot, Ane Tusvik Bonde, and Guri Nordstrøm. We have the great honor of handing over this year's Free Media Awards. And with this, I thank the jury, and I'd like to invite the first award winners, photographers Mstislav Chernov and Yevgeny Malaletka, to join me here on the stage. Photographers Mstislav Chernov and Yevgeny Malaletka are jointly awarded a Free Media Award for their extraordinary, courageous documentation of the Russian siege and bombing of Mariupol. Their reports, and especially their photographs, show the whole world the pain and abuse being inflicted on the local population. Chernov and Malaletka risked their lives by remaining in Mariupol to document the Russian war of aggression. Their documentation of the maternity ward bombing has been used by virtually every single international press agency. Mstislav Chernov is a war correspondent, photographer, videographer, and journalist for Associated Press, as well as president of the Ukrainian Association of Professional Photographers. Yevgeny Malaletka is a freelancer with AP and other international media. Please, Yevgeny and Mstislav, accept this token of our support, admiration, and acknowledgement of the work you've done.
For solidarity. This is what helps Ukrainians and Ukrainian journalists to go on. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge the work of our field producer, incredibly important for our work, without who we couldn't do this work in Mariupol, Vasilisa Stepanenko. So, yeah, this is exactly what we spoke about, fixers and producers in the field. It's always important that without them, the work of journalists, safety, the depth of stories is just impossible. So we need to recognize that. And yeah, please accept our apologies. I'm sure as all Ukrainians will be standing here, this topic is very emotional for us. So we stumble, we fall, and we go forward. And we are very emotional, and we are in pain as the whole nation. However, this awards is a big thing for us. It's a message of solidarity for not just for our work, but for all Ukrainian journalists, and it's an important one. It will drive us forward us and our colleagues that will drive us forward and gives us strength to continue our work. And after this conference, we will be going back to Ukraine, to our cities, and getting cities occupied, my cities under constant attacks. Our friends are being killed and injured, and our relatives lost their homes. And we will continue to report from there until the war is over, until the Russian invasion is over. This is a choice that we make, and maybe we don't in some way. But I'm sure that all of the Ukrainian journalists, as well as I and everyone else, would trade any awards, anything we did, just for things not to happen. You know, for everything we filmed just disappear and never happen. To hell with all the awards. Just let this war not happen. And the whole reason for the free media awards, I guess, is because the world media are in trouble. There is something wrong. That there is speech is not free. The media is not free. The media is under attack. The journalists are under attack, and all we can do is just to survive and keep going. And I want to tell you a small story, an important one. We were in Mariupol, and when we were in Mariupol for several days, we were staying in a hospital filming injured people coming in, children dying in front of our eyes, grown-ups dying, losing limbs, losing relatives. There was so much pain, so much suffering. And the tragedy is that this is a small fraction of what was really happening, and what is still happening. We've been able to capture only a very, very small part of it. And this is our frustration, that we were not able to show more, to explain more. But we went out from the hospital to see what's going on with the city, and we've been shocked by how much city changed. We haven't been in the city for maybe 3-4 days, and in these 3-4 days something happened. Grocery stores, shops were looted, people were fighting, people were in panic. There were bodies on the streets, they were collected, thrown into the mass graves. There was a feeling of dread and terror, and I couldn't understand how did this happen in only 4 days. And then it occurred to us, there was no connection in the city. For these 4 days, 3-4 days, there was complete blackout. So no information was going in, no information was going out. Only connection we had is just a satellite phone. But nobody else had it. So people got desperate. I think what inflicted the most damage so far, as that what I saw, to people, is that they didn't know what's going on outside. They didn't know what's going on with their relatives in a neighborhood nearby, in the villages nearby. In Kiev, was the capital taken? Or were their families alive? This absence of information, this absence of connection, of understanding the world around them, just destroyed society completely in 4 days. And I realized that sometimes information and, well, I wouldn't say journalism, but I say, because journalists are just people who help to bring information, to spread information to people, that is probably more important than food for people. It's important for survival. However, I want to underline that the work we did in Mariupol is the work that every single journalist does right now in Ukraine, risking in other conflict zones as well, risking their lives to keep people informed. So I just want a recognition to all of the Ukrainian journalists, all the international media who is coming and doing their work in Ukraine. Thank you.
You don't give me a room for anything to say extra. Yeah. Thank you. It's an honor to stay here to present Ukrainian journalism, and thank you for that highlighted our work. It's really important but this is work not only us but all Ukrainians, that who are trying to live in that war, to survive, and but as Mr. Stav told before, like, my hometown is next to Mariupol. It is occupied, and most of my friends left. My parents evacuate, and mostly all people who I know, like, and only 30% of people decided to stay. And for us, like, this war started 8 years ago, while we start working in Euromaidan, and then in Crimea, and then in Donbass. And I think we've been in many various dangerous situations for these last years, but it cannot compare what we have seen this year. This full scale of invasion and using all type of weapons against Ukrainians committed by the Russian forces is massive, and during these 20 days, what we spent in Mariupol, I think we not need to prove, just everybody saw this. And I always ask myself, why? It's the same question asked Maria Yatskova while touching the fingers of her son Kirill. 18 months old boy was killed by the shell, and doctors tried to save his life, but they couldn't. On the March 9, airstrike destroyed maternity hospital number 3. I remember the rescue workers and policemen carry Irina, 31 years old, wounded pregnant woman. They rushed to take her to the ambulance while passing the debris, destruction, like broken trees. I remember she was alive at that time, but unfortunately, we witnessed it in a few days that Irina and her baby did not survive. And all the pictures, that we are taking there, it's all the time is someone's lives, it's just very hard to understand that this is Ukrainians. This is not like just people on the picture, and all that happening with us, with our families and friends. And I think, the Mariupol stories was important, but all the cities were not only Mariupol was destroyed, bombed. There was Izum, there was Chernigiv and other areas, which is bombing now, Zaporizhzhia, Kiev. And it's a lot of work, to witnesses and document for the 1,000 killed in this bloody war. So, thank you.
I would like to ask Natalia Gumenyuk on stage. Let me introduce Natalia to you quickly. Natalia Gumenyuk is a journalist and author, and she's awarded a Free Media Award for her truth-seeking reports on the horrors of war from a variety of locations such as Kharkiv, Bucha, and Mykolaiv in Ukraine. With integrity, humanity, and depth, she gives a voice to the victims of war. Gumenyuk also makes astute observations about the resistance in the Ukrainian community. She specializes in foreign affairs and conflict reporting, and recently founded the Public Interest Journalism Lab, a Ukrainian media organization made up of journalists and sociologists who work together to forge new approaches to journalism. Public Interest Journalism Lab has concentrated on reporting from the front lines since the Russian invasion began, and co-founded the Reckoning Project, which creates in-depth media content and provides legal evidence to build war crime cases. Gumenyuk's texts have also been published in The Rolling Stone, Die Zeit, The Atlantic, The Guardian, and The Washington Post. She is the author of several books, including The Lost Island, Tales from the Occupied Crimea, that has been published 2 years ago.
Thanks a lot. It's an honor and responsibility, of course. And I do receive this award as an individual, but of course, as it was mentioned before, I do write a lot now for international media, as I think that should be the priority the world should know if I have this opportunity and the platform, but nothing can be done without my public interest journalism team on the ground with whom I worked from the first days, and as well later with the Reckoning Project team with whom we document war crimes and record what I believe historic truths, so justice must be served. But nothing can be done. There are always the most important people in the journalism, I believe. And for me, it's of course are those citizens of Ukraine, those survivors, the widows, the parents of the people who are killed, who went through these horrors but found the courage to tell their story because they truly believe that it matters. It's not very easy for the survival, in fact, to remember the way how they've been tortured. It's maybe sometimes better to forget. It's really a traumatic experience, so you should be trained how to talk to these people. But there is no way to tell the story differently, so I do think that we journalists can do nothing without them. So any award we receive, any gratitude or salute, is really the gratitude to those who talk to us. But I also want to tell a story, of course, about the conditions we work, because, of course, as a Ukrainian being outside of Ukraine, of course, I feel I represent not just the team, but of course the profession as such. But given a random example of my team, I want to explain this reality. So now, for instance, we have the people from all over the country, the journalists. But as the citizens of Ukraine, first of all, 4 of them in Chernihiv, Kharkiv, Irpin, and Severodonetsk lost their flats, apartments, because they've been bombed. 1 has been detained in Kakhovka, was there for 8 days in captivity. The husband of 1 was wounded in the front line. The father was captured and for 21 days was kept in detention in Chernihiv region. There are journalists whose parents are in occupied Kakhovka, occupied Zaporizhia, occupied Berdyansk. These are all just random members of the team who, by chance, as citizens, have this reality. We have a journalist who's photographer who spent 2 weeks in the basement of Bucha, but luckily survived. We have a close colleague of us who was mobilized and turned to be a paratrooper fighting for liberation of Izum and Liman recently. But of course, I understand that often the Ukrainian journalists are often recognized for their courage and resilience, which I honestly take a bit for granted. But sometimes the Ukrainian journalists are denied the right to be objective and considered to be objective. So I'm using this award and this moment, in fact, to salute and recognize the professionalism of my colleagues and their incredible professionalism and objectivity as well in the way they pursue their profession. Because despite of all the circumstances I named, at this half a year, I'm doing journalism for almost 2 decades. We've never been so careful about the facts, so cautious about the ethic, so interested in a number of opinions of the people we talk. Because now, you know, I taught journalism, I studied journalism, and we always followed the rules, we always followed the ethical principles, but also it was never that instrumental. So I also should say that Ukrainian journalists, many of them practice their work and they live through those principles. They are not just corrigible, they don't do their work anytime, anywhere different than anybody else. So in this age of uncertainty, when so much can be denied, I also like to stress also and salute the common sense of my colleagues who are ready to tell that black is black and the facts are the facts, they are not the biased. So for me it's also very important that it shouldn't be considered a bias to tell that torturing people is unacceptable, that invading a sovereign country is unacceptable. Or, for instance, challenge the idea that the army, the legit army can and have not just the right, but the duty to defend their fellow citizens. And this all, for me, it's very important that we should consider these things as a facts, not as a bias. So, finalizing this short acceptance speech, I also like to call for preserve the common sense and not to be afraid to be considered banal when we are doing our journalism, when we just say that humanity matters, that freedom is better than tyranny, and that in the end, that we won't accept the situation when the atrocities would be normalized. So in the end, my call is really with pursuing professional journalism and giving the real names to what is going on. This is my call to preserve humanity, because for me, personally, this call to preserve humanity and common sense is probably something the most important which is driving my work and the work of my team. Thank you.
I would like to ask Katerina Zagatskova and Roman Stepanovic to come to the stage for the online newspaper Zaborona. The brave independent journalists who work for the online newspaper Zaborona are faithful to journalistic standards even in times of war. Zaborona is awarded a Free Media Award for its critical investigative stories and reports, among other things, about far-right movements in Ukraine, Russia, and across post-Soviet countries, and the links between them. The word Zaborona means taboo in Ukrainian, and the newspaper addresses topics that are often overlooked by other Ukrainian media. For example, right-wing radicalism, feminism, and LGBTQ issues. Katerina Zagatskova is editor-in-chief, and she co-founded Zaborona along with Roman Stepanovic in 2018.
Thank you. It's an honor, and I'm a bit nervous. The last time I wore a blazer was way before the war, and like that makes me feel uncomfortable even more. As a founder, as a co-founder of the media with Katerina, from the beginning, I was struggling to keep the word of the press and of our media free and independent. And it seemed for me that this is a hell of a struggle. Right now, every Ukrainian basically shares it in multiple times for fighting for being free and independent. And journalists, photographers, cameramen, fixers, all of us, indeed we are eyes of any wrongdoing possible happening in this world, happening on this planet. Simply for making it visible and readable. And the terrorism, the war, is probably the worst thing that humankind can ever invented or ever made. And oops, we did it again, but this time was Russia behind it. And that eyes I'm talking about must be clear and sober as never before, really. Just because whatever bad things could usually happen in Ukraine throughout the year before now happens, now all of that fits in one day. And as for today, we have 230 something days of war, so this is how we feel, like the same but in years. And that's intense. And for the last 8 months of this war, Zabrona journalists stand by 24/7. We have been shelled, threatened, detained, had internet and power cutoffs, and nevertheless we did have fair, deep, professional journalists that we are proud of, that I believe is valuable. And finally, not only me, thank you for jury. And society sees journalists at war as the sort of like special forces, you know, units, squads, but we have cameras instead of guns, but it's not so. We're just people as everybody else. And any media worker in Ukraine became a journalist on a February 24th, and since then we had no weekends, unfortunately. And we have families, and we have someone to care about. And when the war starts, and this stuff, whatever happens in your city or in your country, you go there, you cover it, you follow it. But it's pretty hard to do when you have your family, which is in insecure position, your children, you cannot guarantee them safety by the end of the day. And this is horrible for being a father or parent. And this is what we tackle with, and this is very complicated. And, you know, as you know, there's no safe place in Ukraine right now. Just recently this morning, Kyiv was attacked by Russian drones, killing at least 2 people. It was a couple of man and wife waiting for a child to be born in 3 months. So we can say there's 3 people dead in the end, and dozens of injured. But it became so everyday headlines that we not really follow them and pay enough empathy that could happen like a year ago or any time before. My grandfather, he's originally from Belarus, and he, being a kid, he's seen all this heavy stuff that happened to Belarus during the Nazi occupation, and what they did to whole villages for if there was one member of them being part of partisan movement or something. And that horrible things sound for me crazy, and by that time I was struggling to get more information from my granddad. He was pushing me away. He didn't want to share any of the details of that because it's gonna be traumatizing, but that was very important. And right now I believe, remembering all these kinds of memories back from my childhood, that all these stories can really be part of the next story that Zaborona will write about. Without jokes, I don't see like a big deal is gonna happen tomorrow, because like the worst we feel has already happened, but it's keep on happening every day, day by day. And for the safety degradation in Ukraine, it goes from extremely dangerous to kind of livable under certain circumstances. But this framework can be revised by our northern neighbor, Russia, any moment, overnight. And it not really belongs to us. So I believe this is extremely needed to stay where I stand, to rub that ice, to see it clear, and more important to understand that the work we do is the work we do it right. And coming here, we see and hear not only empathy, which is basic, but we hear understanding, we hear discussion, we hear solidarity and the desire for justice. And this is very important to us, to all of us. And I want to thank the whole Zaborona team, the jury, the Free Thought Foundation, die Zeit Stiftung, and the beautiful city of Oslo. Thank you.
Hi. These days, I often think about the sense of journalism, because people don't like journalists, and they are often mad at us, and so many people don't trust the press today. So sometimes you just losing this sense of the profession. But also in the times like now, I also feel that our profession is so important. A few years ago, we, along with my Zaborona team, we filmed a short documentary about local activists in Mariupol. There was an activist who has been organizing protests against one of the biggest oligarchs in Ukraine. Because he owned metallurgical plant in the city, and this plant was littering Mariupol. There was a bad metallic smell in the air, so you could barely breathe. And Dima was a very smart and open-minded man who dreamed about good changes for his city. And he had a dream to shut down this plant and to beat up this oligarch. And he wanted to create a new, to make Mariupol a touristic, beautiful city on a seaside. And during the filming, we placed Dima in front of the Azov steel plant. This big one, I guess you could saw it in news. We placed him with a drum kit, and he was playing drums with a mask on his face. It was before the COVID times, but you just couldn't breathe in Mariupol at the moment. And we had set fire to colorful smoke bombs, pink and blue, to show that the air is, full of dust and poison. Dima was laughing and joking that he looks like a madman in the city. And that was true. It was a bit crazy that one man decided to beat up an oligarch and to shut down the whole plant. in the very big industrial city. But Dima was so convinced that it is possible, that everything is possible if you really want to make changes. When Russia invaded Ukraine and started to bomb Mariupol, I decided to check on people whom I knew in the city to make sure that they are safe. And then I figured out that Dima went missing. In the beginning of the invasion, he was helping his fellow citizens. He was volunteering. And one day, he just didn't return home. Nobody knows where he is and if he's still alive. And you know, there are actually thousands of stories like that, which we don't know because we are not here. Sometimes journalists can be there in those occupied territories, in Mariupol, in Crimea, in Kherson, and in many, many other Ukrainian cities. And we don't have opportunity to go there and to help those people. And sometimes you feel powerless since you can't help those thousands and even millions of people who suffered from the Russian invasion. But at least we can listen to them. Listen to people's stories, to write them, to show them to the world, and to convince people that changes are possible. And you know, I feel that this is today's sense of journalism: to listen to people who have dreams, to support them before it is too late, and to give a voice to those who really want to change the world. And I hope that we Ukrainians in this room will survive in this war and will be able to see you again next year. This is what I really would like to. Thank you.
Now I would kindly invite Andrei Opptak. Photo and video correspondent Andrei Opptak is awarded a Free Media Award for courageous professional reporting from battle zones, often risking his own life to do so. For many years, he was a correspondent for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Ukrainian service. Through the establishment of Donbas Frontliners in 2021, Andrei Opptak has become one of the most important voices of information about life on the front lines in Donbas, thanks to his photos and video reports. Donbas Frontliner is an independent, interactive medium that from the very first day of its existence covered the military actions and the hybrid war Russia was waging against Ukraine. Andrei Opptak continued his reporting after the massive Russian invasion in February 22, documenting the Russian war crimes and the scope of humanitarian catastrophe.
I'm not spokesman, so sorry. But it's really a long story. Ukrainian-Russian war, it's like a story which started not 24th of February and even not in 2014. Yeah, it's a story for hundreds of the year. And dozens of millions of Ukrainians died this war. Famine, 33, a lot of other wars. And my part in this story started in 2013 when the Revolution of Dignity started. I worked for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and that evening it was day of the famine memory, yeah, like of hunger, of Holodomor, and the Yanukovych regime decided to move from European like direction Ukraine to the Russian direction. Yeah. And Mariana Drach called me and said a lot of people start to mass meeting in the center of Kiev. At that time I was in IT and worked like, I say IT for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. And I was responsible for the technical part of the streaming, yeah. I know how to do it. And no journalist was at that time free, and I decided to film it, yeah. And so I became occasionally the first streamer of Euromaidan, of Revolution of Dignity, and after that I streamed for whole period, and every bloody day, at the last days, like 18th of February, first bodies, first dead people. After that, I filmed and streamed annexation of the Crimea. And after that, I decided to go to the front line and to show to the world what happens there on the Donbass region. Yeah. For many years, I go to the front line and do reports, video, texts, and photos from the forgotten Ukrainian war. Yeah. And in 2020, I decided to do the project Donbass Frontliner because I saw the lack of information from the front line and no interest from the world, even from inside of Ukraine, to the situation at the front line. At that time, it was 450 kilometers of the trenches, artillery shelling, every night fights, and a lot of killed soldiers. Yeah. I go to ground fighting and I grab very, very, very big thank you to people who support me. It was a lot of journalists, of Ukrainian journalists who understand the problem and the lack of information from the front line. And great thanks to my wife, to Lisa. Yeah, she supported me too very much. And we start in May of 21, and for till the end of the year, we was honestly like just one team and one media who show for social networks the reality at the front line. Because there was, of course, a TV, was some international journalists, but directly for social media, it was just Donbass Frontliner. And of course, like, situation will change it in 24th of February, and forgotten Ukrainian war become very, like, famous, sadly, and, like, very big problem for Ukraine and for the whole world. After that, a lot of places. And no, I predict the Russian invasion, but even in nightmare, I can predict that the first day of the mass invasion, I will go home, I will go back to Kiev, to my home, go home to the front line, because the 80 columns of Russian vehicles, 80 kilometers of the Russian vehicles go directly to Kiev. The most maybe sensitive for me moment is March 6th, the European bridge and the mortar shelling of the people, civilians who try to escape the dangerous area, and ahead of me, explosion of the mortar and killed family of IDP from Donetsk, which escaped Donetsk in 2014. It was a woman and 2 children, and with them was also IDP from Lugansk man. After that, I traveled a lot along the front line, approximately 50,000 of the kilometers for this year. Yeah, a lot of towns, Kharkiv, Mykolaiv, Avdiivka, Popasna, Bakhmut, no, a lot of big cities. time with colleagues was under almost all types of like artillery shelling, bombing, missile strike, machine gun, sniper fire, and so on, so on, so on. I had one award from Ukrainian president, and for me it was a very sad story because the first and the least, it was journalists who died, and the family of this journalist get award. Yeah, so it was a really sad story. But no, we need to work. We need to go ahead with all this journalism because one journalist can't change nothing in this world. But together with international community, with Ukrainian society, with Ukrainian journalists, with international journalists, with Ukrainian army, and with help from the abroad, from the West, from the country who understand the situation, just together we can stop the bloody wave from the east here. And it seems Russia ready to do new wave, and if he will not stop it in Ukraine, it will go ahead to Europe, and it will be real physical problems for you too, not just information and like economy. I really appreciate this award, and it's really appreciated, and thank you very much for this award. But it's award also really for all Ukrainian media, international media, and fixers who work along the front line and risk his lives and their lives for the like to stop this Russian bloody wave. Yeah, thank you.
The freelance journalist Vladislav Yesepenko is being awarded for his crucial work as a journalist under extremely difficult conditions. Before being captured by the Russian Federal Security Service in March 2021 in Simferopol, Yesepenko reported on the confiscation of property, the life of the Crimean Tatars, ecological crisis, and the destructions in the wake of the Russian occupation of the Crimean Peninsula for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Crimea Realities. In February 2022, Yesepenko was wrongfully sentenced to 6 years in prison. He is currently being held as a political prisoner by Russian authorities on the Russian-occupied Crimean Peninsula. Yesepenko is a striking example of the persecution of journalists who tried to report from Crimea. As Vladislav cannot be here, his daughter, Stefania, will get the award on behalf of her father. So Stefania, please come up. The wife of Yesepenko, Katarina, she will make a speech on behalf of Lats. The speech will be in Ukrainian, but you all have it in English, so you can read it.
Почну з того, що отримання вже другої премії в цьому році для Владислава – це краща відповідь тим нелюдам, які піддавали його тортурам і говорили, що його робота нічого не варта. Чому Влад вирішив знімати репортажі в окупованому Криму? Тому що він знав, що цим майже ніхто не займається, що це ризиковано, і вважає, що люди заслуговують знати правду, знати, що там відбувається. Тому що в результаті анексії Криму нова влада формувала там свій авторитарний режим і ще більше посилила переслідування українців, що призвели до нових форм насильства, вбивств та тортур. І те, як ми думаємо про це, і, мабуть, ще важливіше, як ми розповідаємо, має величезне значення. Адже відомі факти з історії, що те, що трапляється і не обговорюється, замовчується, перестає існувати. І так Владислав зробив свій моральний вибір для того, щоб відстоювати право на справедливість, право на свободу слова та свободу мислення. Мій чоловік готовий заради цього ризикувати своїм життям, і він це довів, провівши 19 місяців в російській в'язниці. Його затримали, так, але не змусили замовчати. Владислав продовжує говорити світові правду про політичних в'язнів сумління, яких зустрічає і з якими знайомиться у російській тюрмі. Я хочу зараз зачитати уривок із заяви Владислава про обставини його затримання і тортур. Приблизно через годину мене привезли в якийсь підвал без вікон. В цьому підвалі співробітники ФСБ силою роздягли мене догола. Я колись читав, що в концтаборах нацистів, щоб жертва втрачала здатність до спротиву, також роздягали догола. Потім мене поклали на підлогу і на вуха надягли 2 петлі, дроти яких йшли до предмета, схожого на армійський польовий телефон. Потім по дротах пустили струм. Біль був дуже сильний, очі вибухали вогнями, а мозок ніби закипав. Від такого болю я ладен був зізнатися в чому завгодно і підписати будь-які папери. У перервах мене водили в туалет, давали попити води. Катування струмом змінювалося побиттям мене співробітниками ФСБ. Причому в голову вони не били, а намагалися бити в живіт, по ногах і в пах. На ранок я дав свідчення на камеру і підписав якісь документи. Хочу сказати, що це лише мільйонна доля страждань від тих, які зараз переживає український народ під час війни. І завдяки інтернету кожен майже може приймати участь у цьому процесі, відповідально чи безвідповідально, з любов'ю чи ненавистю. І коли ця історія змінюється, змінюється і світ. Не існує книги чи методички, де вчать бути дружиною політичного в'язня. Попри те, зараз все моє життя зосереджене на діях, які наближають повернення мого чоловіка додому. І з огляду на лауреатів минулих років, таких як Станіслав Асєєв, і лауреатів цього року, Андрія Дубчака, Мстислава Чернова, Євгена Малолєтки, для Владислава це найважливіше професійне визнання. І від імені Владислава Єсипенка я хочу подякувати організаторам і журі цієї премії за довіру і сказати, що для Владислава це дуже велика честь. Дякую.
At last, we also want to give a special recognition to the so-called unnamed fixers in Ukraine, and that is those Ukrainians who help foreign correspondents to do their jobs, with contacts, translations, schedules, transportation, and local knowledge. Several of them are themselves local journalists. Their work is crucial for making local stories available to an international audience, and their contribution largely goes unnoticed. The fixers deserve more recognition for their contributions and for the high risk they take in conflict zones. Without their invaluable support, it would be extremely difficult for visiting journalists to cover the war and tell their stories.